The ruins of the crashed orbital station had been swallowed by the planet Duran for so long that trees had grown through its broken hull. Nobody came here for the trees. They came for what lay beneath, sealed inside a vault of black stone that no machine had ever managed to open, no mind had ever managed to reach, and no living being had entered in 500 years. The dragon prince called Sorath slept inside that vault. Grand Archivist Dale stood at the entrance with 12 of the finest mind-shapers in the Ethon Conclave arranged behind him in a wide circle. They wore silver robes. They had been preparing for this attempt for 3 years. Dale himself had spent 30 years on Sorath, 30 years of study, theory, failure, and revision. He raised his hand. The circle began. The resonance pulse hit the vault door like a wave against a cliff. The stone did not vibrate. The door did not shift. Not even a line of dust fell from the carved surface. Dale held the pulse for 4 minutes, teeth clenched, sweat running into his collar. Then the effort broke. 3 of the mind-shapers dropped to their knees. 1 fainted. Dale stood very still, staring at the door, saying nothing. He had failed again. 7 attempts, 7 failures. The door stood exactly as it always had. The human delegation arrived 2 hours later. Colonel Sira Olmath led them in, a small team, not a military force. Practical boots, practical equipment, no ceremony. Dale watched them come down the slope toward the excavation site and felt something close to irritation. He had not asked for humans. The Ethon Council had sent them anyway, as observers. Political noise, he thought. One of them immediately walked the wrong direction. While Olmath greeted Dale with professional courtesy and Dale answered with professional coldness, the one who had walked off was crouching near the base of the vault wall, looking at the carvings. He had a worn notebook in one hand. He was writing in it. He had not introduced himself to anyone. Dale's young aide, Luno, drifted closer to him out of curiosity. The man's name, Luno found out from the manifest, was Ren Aldrich, xenologist, civilian specialist. His file listed no combat experience, no psionic rating, no remarkable skills of any kind. He had been assigned to document the site. Ren was not documenting anything particularly important at that moment. He was looking at a carved image of Sorath, wings spread, head raised, rendered in stone with extraordinary detail, and he had tilted his head slightly to one side. "Remarkable," he said to no one. His voice was quiet and even, the way someone talks when they are simply thinking out loud. "The proportions are perfect. Whoever carved this actually knew him." He wrote something in his notebook. Then he looked at the vault door for a moment, looked back at the carving, and said, still to no one, "Must have been something to see that in real life." Then he went back to writing. Luno watched him for a moment. There was nothing unusual about what the man had done, and yet it felt unusual. Luno could not explain why. Far below the stone, in the complete darkness of the vault, in the cold silence that had not changed in 500 years, something happened that had never happened before. Deep in the layered sleep of a being older than most civilizations, something shifted, not waking, not even close to waking, but the absolute stillness broke, for just a moment, into something slightly less still. One enormous eyelid moved. Not open, just a flutter, the smallest possible signal that somewhere behind it, something had registered, something had been heard. It lasted less than a second, then the stillness returned. Nobody in the excavation site knew it had happened. The instruments were not sensitive enough to catch it. Dale was already back in his tent, reviewing his failed data. Olmath was setting up the camp perimeter. Ren was still writing in his notebook slowly, taking his time. The vault looked exactly as it always had. But it was not quite the same as it had been before. Rain came to Duran before dawn and turned the excavation paths to mud. It did not stop Ren. He arrived at the vault entrance at the same time as the day before, boots already dirty, thermos under one arm, notebook under the other. He did not make any announcement. He just sat down on a flat stone near the entrance, poured something hot into the thermos cap, and looked at the carvings while he drank. The carvings were long. They covered the full height of the vault wall on both sides of the entrance, scenes from Sorath's history, rendered with the kind of detail that meant the carvers had either witnessed the events or been told about them by someone who had. Ren worked through them slowly, left to right. He had been doing this since yesterday. He was maybe a third of the way through. He described what he saw as he went, quietly, to himself. A battle above a gas giant. A treaty signing between Sorath and 3 different species. A scene that appeared to show Sorath shielding an entire city with his body while something large and terrible struck from above. That one must have hurt, Ren said. He wrote something down. He did not know, could not have known, that inside the vault, the vast fragmented awareness that had flickered the day before was beginning to form something slightly more coherent. Not thoughts, exactly, not yet, more like the beginning of attention. Sorath had been filtering out the world for 500 years. Every attempt to reach him had felt like pressure, like hands pushing, like voices that wanted things. He had learned to make himself smaller inside his own mind, retreating from contact, from demand, from the endless noise of beings who needed him to do something. This was different. The voice outside did not push. It did not call his name with intent. It did not carry the specific frequency of want that Sorath had spent centuries blocking. It was simply there, steady, unhurried, describing things it found interesting. Sorath's ancient mind reached toward it the way a sleeper shifts toward warmth without fully waking. He heard fragments: stone, wing, pain, remarkable. The words meant little in isolation, but the sound of them meant something, the tone of them. Dale arrived mid-morning with his team to begin setting up a new resonance apparatus, a different approach, harmonic arrays, instead of direct psionic contact. He saw Ren still sitting near the entrance and stopped. "You're in the way," Dale said. "I can move," Ren said. He moved without argument to a spot 3 meters to the left. He kept writing. The harmonic arrays took 2 hours to calibrate. When they activated, the sound they produced was somewhere between a tone and a scream, complex, layered, designed to find and match the specific frequency of Sorath's dormant mind. Ren covered his ears. The stone of the vault entrance did not respond in any measurable way. Dale ran the sequence for 20 minutes, adjusted, ran it again, adjusted again. After the 3rd attempt, Ren lowered his hands and said, quietly, to himself, "That seems like a very aggressive way to say hello." Luna, who was standing nearby checking the array readings, heard him. He said nothing, but he wrote something small in his own notebook. The instruments recorded something unusual that afternoon, a faint seismic signal from inside the vault, not caused by the arrays, which had already been shut down. It lasted 6 seconds. The technician who logged it marked it as probable geological settling and moved on. Dale did not see the report until the following day. When he did, he stared at it for a long time. 6 seconds of internal movement, unprecedented. He could not explain it. Ren had already gone back to his tent by then. He was transcribing his notes from the day, writing up his observations on the carved scenes, eating a meal that had gone slightly cold. He was not thinking about Sorath in particular. He was thinking about the craftsmen who had made the carvings, who they were, what tools they used, whether they had known the dragon personally. He found himself hoping they had. Inside the vault, in the slow and enormous process of something waking that had forgotten how to wake, Sorath held on to the last word he had heard clearly before the quiet outside returned. The word was beautiful. He did not know what to do with it. He had not heard that word directed at him, not as simple observation, not without transaction behind it, in longer than he could easily calculate. He held it the way old things hold warmth, carefully, without moving. 7 days passed. Ren had a routine now. He arrived before the conclave team each morning, found his flat stone, poured his drink, and worked. He had moved past the battle carvings and into a section that seemed to document Sorath's years of peace, trade agreements in stone, festival scenes, images of the dragon sitting very still while small creatures climbed on him without fear. "You like children," Ren said one morning, studying a panel. He did not say it with surprise, just as an observation. "Or at least you tolerated them," That's something. He wrote it down. He had developed a habit of reading his notes back aloud when he was reviewing them. It was how he caught errors. Saying the words out loud made the wrong ones sound wrong. So each morning, for a while, he would read from the previous day's work, his voice steady and plain, correcting as he went. He made a mistake on the 8th morning. He had written that Sorath's wingspan, based on the carvings, was approximately 40 meters. He read it back, stopped, looked at the carving again and said, "No, that's not right. That's at least 60, maybe more." He crossed it out, shook his head at himself, and laughed, a short, quiet laugh, the kind that is more breath than sound. He fixed the number, kept going. He did not know that deep in the vault, something had been listening to him read for 6 days, not understanding all of it, but listening the way you listen to a fire, not for information, but because the sound itself is a kind of company. The laugh reached Sorath the way the word beautiful had unexpectedly. It was not a performance. It was not aimed at him. It was just a person finding themselves mildly ridiculous and not minding very much. Sorath had heard laughter used as a weapon, as a signal of superiority, as something sharp. This was none of those things. This was someone laughing at a wrong number about a dragon's wings, alone, in the early morning, and moving on. Something in the vast and careful architecture of Sorath's retreat cracked slightly, not broke, cracked. Dale found Ren on the 9th morning and stood in front of him until Ren looked up. "I need to understand what you're doing," Dale said. "Documentation," Ren said. "The carvings on the east face are." "The vault has been registering thermal variation for 4 days," Dale said. "Internal temperature increase of 2 degrees. Internal. That has never happened, and it correlates with your presence here." Ren considered this. "I haven't touched anything." "I know you haven't." Dale's voice was controlled but tight. "That's what concerns me. Whatever is happening, I don't understand the mechanism, and I can't allow an uncontrolled variable near a site this sensitive. I'm asking you to work from the secondary station." The secondary station was on the far side of the hill, out of range of the vault. "I understand the concern," Ren said, "but my assignment is to document the site, and the primary carvings are here." "Your assignment can be reassigned." Colonel Omath appeared, as if she had been listening from nearby, which she had. She spoke calmly and precisely. Ren's clearance was issued by the Interspecies Research Authority. Dale's authority extended to the Conclave's equipment and personnel. The two jurisdictions did not overlap. Dale left without responding. Luno, who had witnessed this, quietly found Ren afterward and handed him a printed copy of the site regulations. The relevant section was highlighted. It confirmed Omath's reading. "Thank you," Ren said. "I think," Luno said carefully in his careful way, "that what you are doing matters, even if I cannot explain why." Ren looked at him for a moment. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I'm just here." "Yes," Luno said, "that is what I mean." The next morning, Ren arrived earlier than usual. The site was empty. The sky over Duran was a deep blue-gray, the kind that comes before the light fully arrives. He sat on his stone, poured his drink, and looked at the vault entrance for a while without writing. Then he said, quietly, without planning to, "I don't know if you can hear me. I just want you to know I'm not here to make you do anything." He didn't say it like a speech. He said it the way you say something when you suddenly feel it is true and want it said, even if no one is listening. For a long moment, nothing. Then from somewhere deep inside the vault, from somewhere so far down that the sound arrived not as sound, but as pressure, as vibration in the stone beneath his feet, something exhaled. Not wind, not machinery, a breath, deliberate, enormous. Ren sat very still, his drink cooled in his hands. He did not move for a full minute, listening. The vault was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The kind that comes after something decides to be quiet, rather than the kind that was always there. Ren set down his thermos. He opened his notebook to a fresh page. He wrote, "It heard me." Ren did not call anyone. He sat on the stone and waited. He was not sure what he was waiting for, but it felt wrong to leave, and it felt wrong to make noise, so he did neither. He watched the vault entrance. The blue-gray sky behind him slowly brightened. Birds that lived in the broken hull of the station above began to call to each other. The thermos went cold. 20 minutes passed. Then, from inside the vault, came a sound. It was not a roar, it was not even loud, which made it stranger, given the size of what was making it. It was a single word, low and resonant, in a language that no school in the Ethon Conclave currently taught. Wren's translation implant, standard issue for xenologists, capable of processing over 800 documented languages, took 4 full seconds to render it. The word it gave him was, "Still here." Wren sat with that for a moment, then he said, plainly, "Still here." Another long pause, then 2 more words, slow and careful, like someone testing weight on old ice. "You stayed." "Yes," Wren said. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It had texture. Wren got the distinct impression that something vast was thinking, not quickly, but seriously. "Why?" The implant caught that one easily, 1 syllable, direct. Wren thought about it honestly. "I wasn't finished," he said. "With the carvings, I wanted to see the rest." He paused. "And I suppose I didn't want to leave in case you woke up and there was no one here." A very long pause. "No one has said that before." "I believe it," Wren said. What followed was not a conversation in the ordinary sense. There were silences that lasted 3 or 4 minutes between exchanges. Sorath's words came out slowly and sometimes incomplete, as if the act of forming language again, after 5 centuries, required physical effort. Sometimes the implant flagged a word as uncertain and gave Wren 2 possible meanings. Wren chose the one that made more sense in context and moved forward. Sorath asked where the others were. Wren explained that the Conclave team would arrive in a few hours. Sorath did not respond to that. He asked, instead, what Wren had written in his notebook. Wren told him observations on the carvings, measurements, notes on the artistic style, comparisons to similar work from other cultures. "You wrote about the carvings." "Yes." "Not about me." Wren considered the distinction. The carvings are about you, but they're also their own thing. The people who made them were remarkable. Another long silence. "Then, why did you come here?" "I was assigned," Wren said. "My department sent me to document the site." "That is not what I am asking." Wren understood. "I stayed because I wanted to," he said. "I find this you interesting, not useful, interesting." The stone of the vault entrance made a faint sound, not cracking, more like settling. "You are not afraid." "I'm a little afraid," Wren said honestly, "but not enough to leave." This seemed to mean something. Sorath was quiet for nearly 5 minutes. Wren waited, watching the entrance, until Luno appeared at the top of the hill path and stopped dead when he saw Wren sitting in what was clearly not his usual posture. Alert, still. Wren held up one hand without looking back. "Wait." Luno waited. Then the instruments inside the monitoring station, unmanned at that hour, began to register readings that would later be described in the official report as, quote, "inconsistent with any prior recorded event at this site. Thermal output tripling, seismic signatures expanding through the surrounding rock, sound frequency emissions in ranges that human ears could not detect, but that several species' ears absolutely could." Luno pressed his hands to the sides of his head and made a small sound. Wren did not move. From inside the vault, the words came slower this time, as if they cost something to form. "You are a small creature." "Yes," Wren agreed. "Why should I speak to a small creature?" Wren thought about this. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. He did not reach for flattery or strategy. He said, "You don't have to, but I was here, and I think you wanted to." A very long pause. "Then you are correct." Maury Stone sounds, deeper now. The flat rock under Wren shifted almost imperceptibly. Luno, at the top of the hill, grabbed a monitoring post to steady himself and stared downhill with enormous eyes. Sorath asked one final question before the world changed. His voice, even in fragments, carried the weight of millennia. What do your kind want from this world? Ren did not answer immediately. He looked at the vault entrance. He thought about Dale and his arrays. He thought about Olmath and her careful protectiveness. He thought about Luno and his highlighted regulations. He thought about the carvings, the battles, the treaties, the small creatures climbing on a very large and patient dragon. Then he said, honestly, to understand it and try not to break it. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. Then the stone began to move. Not the vault door alone, the whole hillside, a deep, grinding geological shift, the sound of something immense changing its position for the first time in 5 centuries. Luno dropped his notebook. The monitoring station alarms went off in sequence, one after another, like a chain of falling things. Somewhere above, birds exploded from the broken hull of the station in a panicked cloud. Ren stayed on his stone. He watched the entrance fill with light, not sunlight, but something older, something that came from inside, and he did not run. He had been waiting for this. The light that came from the vault was not warm. It was ancient, the color of stars seen through deep water, pale and vast. It moved across the hillside in slow pulses, as if something inside was breathing. Then the door was simply gone. Not broken, not pushed, gone, retracted into the stone around it the way an eye retracts behind a lid. The entrance was taller than any building Ren had ever stood inside, wider than the street he had grown up on. And then Sorath came out. The word large did not work. The word enormous did not work. He was the size of something that should not be able to move, and he moved anyway, with the slow and absolute confidence of a thing that has never needed to worry about the space it takes up. Each step rearranged the ground beneath him. His scales were dark, not black, but the deep color of volcanic rock before it cools, and within them ran lines of faint light like cracks in cooling stone. His eyes, when they caught the morning light, were the pale silver of old moons. The wings were folded. His head was low, not in weakness, but in the manner of something enormous trying to fit itself into a world that was not quite built at its scale. The conclave team had arrived by now, drawn by the alarms. Dale stood at the base of the hill with every member of his staff, every instrument running, every sensor aimed at the vault. For a long moment, he simply stared. Sorath walked past him. Not rudely, not with aggression, with the total indifference of someone who has not reached their destination yet. Dale was a rock on a path. Sorath moved around him and kept walking. He stopped in front of Ren. Ren had stood up from his stone. He had his notebook in both hands, not as a shield, just because he had been holding it and had not thought to put it down. He looked up at the dragon, up, and was quiet. Sorath lowered his head. Not to the ground, but down, carefully, until his eyes were closer to Ren's level. The movement was slow and deliberate, and in its own enormous way, considered. It was the gesture of a being who understood that the other party could not come up to meet them. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Ren nodded. Once, the way you nod at someone you have been talking to for a while and are glad to finally meet properly. Sorath made a sound low in his chest, not a word, acknowledgement. Dale found his voice. He stepped forward and addressed Sorath directly, clearly in the formal address used for entities of significant power, a mode he had spent years memorizing. He spoke about the hollow tide. He spoke well. His voice was steady despite everything. He explained the approaching collapse, the projected casualties, the conclave's calculations, the fact that only Sorath's memory of the previous event 6,000 years ago contained the information needed to stop it. It was a good speech. It was clear, urgent, and completely honest. Sorath did not look at him. He looked at Ren. After a moment, in the slow and weighted words that Ren had now heard enough to recognize, he asked, "Is this true?" Ren pulled out his research implant. He called up the data he had access to, not everything the conclave had, but enough. Stellar mapping reports, conclave observation records, published models from 4 different research institutions. He read through them the way he read everything, carefully, without rushing. He found 2 places where the data seemed uncertain and said so. He found the places where it converged, and said so too. Then he said, "Yes, as far as the evidence shows, it is true." Sorath was still for a very long time. Then he raised his head. He looked out over the assembled crowd, the conclave team, the soldiers, Omath standing apart with her arms crossed and her face carefully unreadable. Luno standing close to the instruments with tears running down his face in the quiet way of someone who does not realize they have started crying. Sorath spoke, in the old language, but loudly enough and slowly enough that the translation implants in the crowd could work. "I will share what I know, not because you have earned it, because the human asked me honestly, and I choose to answer." The hillside was very quiet for a moment. Wind moved through the broken hull of the station above them. One of the conclave instruments beeped and was silenced. Dale stood still. His expression cycled through several things: fury, disbelief, gratitude, a complicated grief for 30 years of effort that had mattered less than one person sitting on a rock and talking. He said nothing. Ormath uncrossed her arms. She walked over to Ren and stood beside him. She did not say anything either. She just stood there, which was enough. Luno picked up his dropped notebook. He realized his face was wet. He wiped it and wrote something down. Ren looked up at Sorath, who had settled back slightly, the initial movement of emergence complete. He looked calmer now, not relaxed exactly, something that large does not look relaxed, but present, grounded in a way that 5 centuries of sleep had not allowed. "Thank you," Ren said simply. Sorath looked at him. "You are the first in a very long time," he said, "who has said that and not meant thank you for the power." "I meant thank you for the conversation," Ren said. Something moved in the ancient silver eyes, something too old to have a simple name. Sorath settled further. His wings shifted once and stilled. He began to speak not to Ren now, but to the assembled crowd, pulling from 6,000 years of memory the knowledge that would save billions of lives. His voice moved like weather. People scrambled for recording equipment. Dale began taking notes with shaking hands. Ren sat back down on his flat stone. He opened his notebook. He found the page where he had written "It heard me." Below it, he wrote today's date. Below that, he wrote, "He did, 3 months later, the planet Duran was quieter." The conclave team had packed most of their equipment. The harmonic arrays were gone. The monitoring stations had been reduced from 14 to 2, both running on automated systems. The excavation path was still muddy in the mornings. Nobody had fixed that. Sorath was still there. He had not left after giving the conclave what they needed. Nobody had asked him to stay, and nobody had asked him to go, which was perhaps exactly why he remained. He had chosen a place on the east side of the hill where the broken station hull created a natural overhang, not a shelter exactly, but a frame. He rested there in a way that was different from sleeping, present, watching the sky. The knowledge he had shared had taken 3 weeks to fully transmit and record, working through Ren as translator and through Luno as documentation lead. The process had been painstaking and strange and occasionally funny. Sorath had strong opinions about how certain things should be written down and was not shy about correcting the scholars who disagreed with him. Luno had said, privately to Ren, that it was the best 3 weeks of his academic life. The conclave had taken the information and built from it. The countermeasure to the hollow tide was in development at 4 separate research stations. Projections said it would be ready in time. The crisis that would have killed billions was going to be stopped by knowledge that had waited inside a sleeping dragon for 60 centuries. Dale had submitted his official report to the Ethon Council. He was a thorough man and an honest one, despite everything. His report acknowledged the role of the human xenologist. He framed it carefully: an unexpected convergence of variables, a fortunate accident of scheduling, a novel approach that produced results his own methods had not. He did not claim credit for it, but he did not linger on it either. Luno submitted his own records separately. He was also a thorough man, and a somewhat angrier one on this particular subject. His account was precise and detailed, and left nothing ambiguous about what had actually happened and why. The council read both. A senior council envoy came to Duran specifically to speak with Sorath, which was itself a historically significant event. She was experienced and careful. She asked Sorath directly, on record, what had ended 5 centuries of dormancy. Sorath considered the question for longer than the envoy was comfortable with. Then he answered. The human did not need me to be a weapon, he said. He was simply glad I existed. I had forgotten what that felt like. The envoy wrote it down. Her assistant wrote it down. The recording equipment recorded it. The official transcript was filed, published, and within 6 months had been cited in more academic papers, diplomatic briefings, and interspecies studies than anything else produced in that decade. It became, in quiet and unlikely ways, one of the most important documents in the history of multi-species relations. Not because of its drama, the words were simple, but because of what they demonstrated. That a species considered minor by most galactic measures, young and small and still learning the shape of the wider universe, had walked into a problem that centuries of effort had failed to solve, and solved it by doing almost nothing, by sitting still. By finding something beautiful and saying so, by asking honest questions and waiting for honest answers. By being, in the particular way that humans seemed unable to stop being, genuinely interested in the world in front of them. Some scholars wrote that it was luck. Others argued it was a specific quality, emotional frequency, they called it, or resonant presence, that humans possessed in unusual measure. Dale, in a lecture he gave 2 years later, said it was simpler than that. He said that every person who had approached Sorath had approached him as a means to an end. Ren had approached him as an end in himself. That was all the dragon had noticed. On Duran, on a morning that was cold and clear, Ren sat on his flat stone near the East Hill and read from his field notes. He had been assigned to continue documentation of the site for another 6 months. He had not argued. He was reading a section about the carved festival scenes, the ones showing the small creatures climbing on Sorath without fear. He was reading it back to check for errors, which meant he was reading it aloud. He reached a line where he had written that the festival depicted appeared to have been annual, based on the repeated motifs. He read it, stopped, and looked at the carvings again. The motifs were not repeated at equal intervals. He had miscounted. Not annual, he said to himself. Every 3 years, maybe, I need to recount. He sighed at his own mistake and reached for his pen. From the overhang on the east side of the hill came a low sound, resonant, deliberate. Every 4 years, Sorath said. The interval was tied to the orbital cycle of their moon. You were close. Ren looked up. Sorath had not moved. His eyes were not open, as far as Ren could tell. Every 4 years, Ren repeated. He corrected the note. Thank you. Sorath made no further sound. Ren went back to reading. The sky over Duran was a deep and ordinary blue. Wind moved through the old hull of the station. Birds called to each other in the broken metal. The planet went on being a planet, the way planets do, without caring much about the small things happening on its surface. The small things happened anyway. Ren read, Sorath listened. And somewhere in the Ethon Council archives, the transcript of one sentence sat quietly in its file, waiting to be found by anyone who wanted to understand what humanity had brought to the galaxy. Not firepower, not technology, not strategy, but this. A person who sat down near something ancient and frightening and said, out loud, to no one in particular, that it was remarkable. And meant it.